Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this behind-the-scenes look at PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. Here we talk to the key players at PETA and the movement and ask them about how animal rights change their lives and how they stay motivated to make the world a better place for the animals. On today's episode, up first, a PETA investigation in Nashville against PetSmart nets 3 convictions. But guess what? The convicted still work at PetSmart.
If the eyewitness video and photographs of these, sick, injured, clearly dying animals weren't enough to convince a caring person that PetSmart's the last place you would want to be on Earth if you care about animals, the fact that the company would apparently keep convicted animal abusers on their payroll, let alone in a management capacity, I think speaks volumes about how seriously they really take the welfare of animals.
PETA Investigation's Director of Evidence Analysis, Dan Paden, talks about why you shouldn't patronize PetSmart. And then there's another victory involving the stopping of the export of monkeys to labs that will have an impact on experiments in labs around the U.S.
Here's one that Duke University did not long ago. They showed logos of famous commercial brands like Nike and Domino's Pizza to monkeys to see if the monkeys could show a preference after looking at those logos for either sex or power. I know it sounds utterly ridiculous, and you would think, well, that's just silly. But in order to get the monkeys to cooperate, to look at the logos in the first place, they deprived them of water. They kept them thirsty. And that's how so often these animals are coerced into cooperating in experiments that are a huge waste of taxpayer money, that make the animals themselves miserable, and that really get us nothing.
The significance of stopping the shipment of monkeys to labs. That, and remembering the civil rights activist who was ahead of his time as a stalwart for animal rights, California Congressman Ron Dellums, who died this week. That's all next on this episode of the PETA Podcast. But first, we reached another milestone in listenership and want to thank you for joining us here at the PETA Podcast. Please share a link with your friends and let them know the animals have a voice on the PETA Podcast. Go to our webpage at PETA.org and you can binge out on some of my favorites. For more on that PETA investigation on PetSmart that resulted in animal cruelty charges and now on 3 convictions, check out episodes 10 and 12 and follow how the case evolved. Want to go vegan, but want a mentor or need a mentor? Check out episode 25. Our vegan mentor program is guilt-free and will help you live with compassion. And if you want to know how PETA is subtly changing its approach to activism by working with some companies to be the change they want to become, listen to episode 16, where I talk to PETA Executive VP Tracy Ryman. Binge listen now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you catch your podcasts. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, don't forget to rate and review the show. It helps the algorithm know that PETA has a podcast on the issues important to you. Now, if you really want to help the animals, you can always just hit the Donate Now button at PETA.org. And if you're high-tech and have Amazon's Alexa, it's as easy as saying, Alexa, donate to PETA. And now to our episode. We begin with that PetSmart investigation that began in March, where little animals oft ignored were seen as loss leaders to the big box chain. Managers were observed not feeding or caring for sick animals in order to save money and keep store profits high, and in order to get managerial bonuses. PETA got law enforcement to retrieve and save animals from PetSmart in Nashville and file misdemeanor animal cruelty charges against 3 employees. Now those employees have pled out and carry animal abuse convictions. But PetSmart didn't fire the employees. PETA's Dan Paden talks to me about the convictions and PetSmart's response on this episode of the PETA Podcast. There's been a good development in the PetSmart case. Remind us about the case again.
Sure. A PETA eyewitness spent just under a calendar year working in 3 stores operated by PetSmart. She worked in stores in Arizona, Florida, and Nashville, Tennessee. And in late March, based on her evidence, Nashville police executed a search and seizure warrant at the store there. They seized sick and injured small animals. A few weeks later, in tandem with the local district attorney's office, they filed misdemeanor cruelty charges against that store's 3 managers. And we are pleased to report that those individuals have pleaded guilty to cruelty to animals.
So you got a conviction.
So we got 3 convictions. And what is telling, among many other things about this, is that PetSmart stands by those individuals. And as far as we can tell, continues to employ people who have pleaded guilty to and been convicted of abusing animals. PetSmart continues to employ these individuals to run that very store, it seems.
The significance of the case in terms of the taking of the animals and the arrest of these people, was this the first time this kind of thing had happened in the state, or as far as PETA investigation leading to this sort of law enforcement action?
It's the first time we've seen a seizure of animals and a criminal conviction in the actual stores of the big box chains like PetSmart and Petco, not only in Tennessee, but anywhere in the U.S. Prior to this, the law enforcement action we've seen and we've been able to bring about from investigations has been at the suppliers, at these warehouses and mills that are supplying animals to Petco and to PetSmart. And we've made a lot of history and saved a lot of animals' lives through that route. But this marked the first time that officials had gone into one of these stores, seized animals under a warrant, come out, filed charges, taken it to court, and won the case right there.
And once again, these animals that we're talking about, we're not talking about the big animals. We're talking about animals that ordinarily would be ignored and people wouldn't think twice about them being harmed or hurt in any way.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about mice and guinea pigs who were the animals taken out of the store by law enforcement. We also documented cruelty to hamsters and other small animals, reptiles, fish, even birds, and others. But, you know, they all suffer the same. And one of the parts of the sentence for these 3 managers is that they actually have to repay a total of $16,000 plus in veterinary costs that those small animals racked up while they were in the care of Nashville officials.
So once again, these managers were looking to save money, and they were looking to save money by cutting food and medicine and care for these smaller animals, right? I mean, that's what PetSmart did. And PetSmart said, yeah, you can do that because if we save money, then we get bonuses. And so in other words, the bonuses were the incentive to do cruelty to animals.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. I mean, you know, that's the representation made by these managers. And the fact is that they said over and over, you know, I want my bonus. And, you know, at the end of a financial quarter, when they're crunching the numbers and they realize they're nearing their upper limit as to what they're allotted to spend on animal care, which includes veterinary care, the question became, do I rush this guinea pig off to an emergency vet on a Friday night when he clearly needs help? Or do I take home maybe a few extra $100 at the end of the quarter? And the decision was the latter. That ended up costing these individuals cruelty convictions on their record for the rest of their lives. And, you know, for the animals, the PETA eyewitness could get out and law enforcement could get out. At least we were able to save those animals' lives and get them the help that PetSmart was not getting them.
So this is a big victory in terms of recognizing animals who otherwise would be considered not even as living beings. They would be considered, oh, well, we don't have to care about these animals. I mean, they certainly showed it in their actions. They were arrested. They were convicted. And yet there's something that seems not quite so satisfying, because the employees at PetSmart are convicted, but they're still working there. They're still working under with the blessing of PetSmart management.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And of course, PetSmart is still selling these small animals at that store and, more than 1,000 other stores nationwide. They have not gotten the message. And that's why, PETA says over and over that it's incumbent on us, on good people out there, to tell them that, of course, we're not going to purchase animals. I mean, everyone knows you don't purchase animals. You always adopt animals if you're going to add a companion to your family. But you have to take it a step further. You have to not buy supplies for the animals you do have in your family, in your home, from PetSmart or from any retailer that sells animals. And, PetSmart last year purchased Chewy.com, which is a very popular website for animal supplies. And we're telling people, encouraging people not to buy supplies even from Chewy.com. You don't want to line the pockets and the wallets of PetSmart and its executives so long as they continue to put these little animals in harm's way, put them on the shelves, charge $5 for a life in the hopes of drawing you in so that they can then turn around and sell you $150 tank and, a $20 bag of food and so forth.
Yeah. And PetSmart, what did they say throughout this whole thing? Or it sounds like this was like the move to have the employees essentially plead. It wasn't a plea bargain so much, but it was they pled out. They said they were guilty. They're going to accept the fine. Chances are, it was probably done under the auspices of the company who said that we'd cover for you. Do you have any idea about that?
I don't. I don't know the extent to which the company itself or its attorneys were involved in defending these individuals or providing them advice or guidance. I just know that, that the company's statement following these convictions was that they essentially stand by these individuals and continue to believe, in essence, if I'm understanding it correctly, that they continue to believe that they did no wrong. And that begs the question, why did they plead guilty to cruelty to animals?
Because the employees are taking the fall. PetSmart isn't firing them, so I guess that shows you how much or how seriously PetSmart takes it. But has there been any statement from PetSmart subsequent to the convictions?
There really hasn't, except for the fact that they stand by these individuals. And, as far as we can tell, these three are still running the show in Bellevue, which is a neighborhood in Nashville. That store is still operating. These three are still in charge. And, if the eyewitness video and photographs of these, sick, injured, clearly dying animals weren't enough to convince a caring person that PetSmart's the last place you would want to be on earth if you care about animals, the fact that the company would apparently keep convicted animal abusers on their payroll, let alone in a management capacity, I think speaks volumes about how seriously they really take the welfare of animals.
Dan Paden with PETA Investigations on the 3 animal cruelty convictions against PetSmart employees in Nashville and how they're still working there. Go to PETA.org and send a message to PetSmart.
The rumor was that AirbridgeCargo was expanding its business, and it was going to begin shipping monkeys from China to Los Angeles. And when we heard about this, we thought, well, we had not been able to prevent them going to Chicago yet, but they certainly weren't going to expand to Los Angeles. We let our supporters know, and tens of thousands of people emailed and called AirbridgeCargo.
PETA activists and their emails were able to get AirbridgeCargo to change its policy and to stop shipping monkeys to labs around the world, crucial in stopping the use of animals in experimentation. PETA Senior Vice President Kathy Guillermo talks about AirbridgeCargo on the PETA podcast.
AirbridgeCargo, which is a Russian-owned air transport service, was one of the few remaining slave ships that took monkeys from their homes in other countries and brought them to laboratories in the United States.
All right, wait, you call them slave ships, but that's your spin on. They're just an air carrier, right?
I don't think you can say just an air carrier when we're talking about taking monkeys from their own homes in other nations or raising them inside monkey breeding farms in other countries, putting them in tiny boxes, shipping them for hours and hours and thousands of miles to what ultimately is misery and death inside a laboratory in the United States. I think a slave ship comes pretty close to being accurate in description.
And so there's no standards in terms of how they should be shipped or what kind of containers or how they're cared for? There was nothing like that? Or, I mean, was it really as bad as you say?
The standards are so poor that even if everything was followed absolutely correctly, which we know is not always the case, it's still a tremendous amount of suffering. Monkeys are put either singly or in twos in very tiny boxes. I mean, the size of a small book box. And that's how they spend the somewhere up to 24 hours that it takes to ship them from one continent to another continent. Then when they arrive in the United States, they are trucked to wherever they're going inside the U.S., to whatever laboratory waits to use them as experimental tools. So
when they have them on board, it's like 24 hours straight? I mean, no break. They don't take them out. Nothing like that. There's nothing that says a cargo animal needs to be cared for or treated in a certain way?
It would be impossible to take them out of their carriers. They're wild animals, for one thing. For another, their health status is not known at the time that they're being transported. When they get to the United States, they're required to be kept in quarantine for a period of time because they may very well be carrying diseases that could be harmful or fatal to human beings or to other animals. And it would just be impossible for somebody to give them a break. And I have to say that once they get to the laboratories, the cages they live in for the remainder of their lives are barely bigger than the transport boxes, maybe a foot or two in either direction. But it's not as though they're going to some natural setting where they'd be able to climb trees and have interactions with other monkeys.
So a monkey would be taken from Asia, say, or what would an example be of what AirbridgeCargo would do?
Well, many of the monkeys are shuttled through China. They either come from China directly or from some other Asian countries. They're sold to laboratories in the U.S. So it worked this way. Either AirbridgeCargo sent their air transport planes to China, picked up the monkeys, and then flew them to the United States, or they actually began in China, transported them through Moscow, and then to the United States. So it's a very long journey.
And so how big was AirbridgeCargo? How big a player was AirbridgeCargo in this whole thing?
Well, when we first got a tip-off from a whistleblower who works at one of the airports in the United States, AirbridgeCargo was one of only two airlines that still transported monkeys into the United States. The other one is Air France. And so think about that next time you're flying Air France, that underneath your feet may be containers of monkeys going to laboratories. But it's quite a big deal when 50% of the airlines transporting monkeys to laboratories end that practice. So
United, Delta, big airlines, they've all said no. And so this was a void that AirbridgeCargo was filling with Air France up until the time that what happened to AirbridgeCargo? What made them back down and say, we're not going to do this anymore?
Well, first of all, you're right. Every other major airline and air transport company in the world has already ended this despicable practice because they have seen video footage from inside the laboratories that we've provided, so they know what these monkeys' fates are going to be. And they've done the right thing. And that's Qantas, Delta, American, United, all of the major airlines, FedEx, DHL, they've all done the right thing here. So what happened with AirbridgeCargo is that they were transporting monkeys to Chicago only. Mm-hmm. And we got a tip off from somebody who works at an airport. The rumor was that AirbridgeCargo was expanding its business and it was going to begin shipping monkeys from China to Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And when we heard about this, we thought, well, we had not been able to prevent them going to Chicago yet, but they certainly weren't going to expand to Los Angeles. We let our supporters know, and tens of thousands of people emailed and called AirbridgeCargo. They very quickly canceled their plans for Los Angeles, and soon after that, they ended the shipping of monkeys altogether.
Was there any sense of how much animals were abused, or were any animals, were there any fatalities during the AirbridgeCargo's when they transported monkeys? Or is it just the general sense of if you're going to be in a container like that, it's abuse, and that's a non-starter? How bad was it?
It's both. I mean, monkeys certainly have been sickened and have died after arrival, after being transported. And it's also the despicable nature of the industry that these animals are going to. And just to give you an example, some of the experiments that we look at for which monkeys are used include, here's one that Duke University did not long ago. They showed logos of famous commercial brands like Nike and Domino's Pizza to monkeys to see if the monkeys could show a preference after looking at those logos for either sex or power. I know it sounds utterly ridiculous, and you would think, well, that's just silly. Mm-hmm. But in order to get the monkeys to cooperate, to look at the logos in the first place, they deprived them of water. They kept them thirsty. And that's how so often these animals are coerced into cooperating in experiments that are a huge waste of taxpayer money, that make the animals themselves miserable and that really get us nothing. Because what use is it to a monkey to look at a Domino's logo? And what use is it to human beings to know whether, after looking at that logo, the monkey prefers to look at a picture of a powerful male monkey or a female monkey?
What was the purpose of that scientific study? Was it a commercial research? What were they getting at?
It was a government-funded study at Duke University by a very prominent experimenter. This is a person who has made tens of thousands, or brought into his universities tens of millions of dollars.
Tens of millions?
Tens of millions of dollars in research funding for these sorts of experiments. And there is a long list of experiments I could go through, but it's quite common, for example, for monkeys to go into laboratories and have the tops of their heads removed and their tops of their skulls taken off so that electrodes can be implanted in their brains, and so that they can teach the monkeys, or coerce them, I should say, by depriving them of adequate water or food, to follow a dot along a computer screen. It's called single neuron tracking. It's quite a popular kind of area of research right now. And this, in the end, is information gained about neurons in a monkey's brain and not in a human's. And there is a non-invasive way of doing it in humans. And even as I hear myself say these things, I know that there are people who are going to think, well, really, would they do it if it's so silly and if nothing comes out of it? And the answer is a resounding yes. I think people would be horrified to see where millions upon millions of their taxpayer money goes in laboratory experimentation in this country. And
quite simply because it's kind of essentially the gravy train, right, for these researchers? It's
the gravy train, and the importation or the shipment of these monkeys from other countries into the U.S. is the supply pipeline. And it is actually much cheaper to buy a monkey from China than it is to breed monkeys and raise them here and sell them, although that is done to some extent. But that gives you an idea of how cheap these animals' lives are.
So hence we get the real significance of the AirbridgeCargo decision it's that you get right to the source. If they don't have monkeys, they can't test, right? These universities can't test.
That's right.
It's like cutting off the supply chain to the drug users, or it's like if you cut it off at it's not. The bad thing, they can't do anything without the monkey. Or now they'll be forced to. Are there alternatives? Are there other animals, or does it stop testing?
I'm sure that it has an impact on the number of studies that are done. The important thing is that they stop testing on animals altogether and turn to methods that work. We know that 90% of studies on animals fail to lead to therapies to help humans. We know animals are not good models for human disease and human ailments. And we know that a whole lot of this experimentation has nothing to do with human disease in the first place. So it just needs to stop. And this is one powerful way to do that. And the response we got from supporters and from people who called AirbridgeCargo, that shows you how people feel about the use of monkeys in experiments. And I think that's the way it has to go with all uses of animals in laboratories.
It's still hard to believe, though, that just by having supporters of PETA, or people who hear about this and are moved to contact AirbridgeCargo, that AirbridgeCargo collapses. I mean, they must feel that this is, if it was important to them monetarily, they'd stand for it. Why do they capitulate so easily?
Well, it's hard to know because they don't let us in on their thought processes. But I do know there are many airlines and many businesses who refuse to play any part in this industry. And it doesn't do anything for AirbridgeCargo's reputation on the world stage and in the world of business to have its hands soiled by this. And I think they were probably very sensitive to that.
So it's just kind of, because they really sounded like as soon as the pressure was on, they folded, they got rid of the business. And so I guess that leaves one major player?
That's right. Internationally, Air France is the only major airline that's still doing this. And we're encouraging people to get in touch with Air France and let them know what you think about this. Tell them you aren't going to be flying their airline as long as they're dealing in monkeys for the laboratory industry.
Once again, though, the significance in terms of the curtailment of these studies, the curtailment of the use of monkeys, and the saving of monkeys' lives. Significant if you can cut down Air France, or will they find other ways to get monkeys or other animals to do the tests?
Well, it certainly makes it more difficult for them. If it's cost prohibitive, in other words, if it costs a lot of money to get a monkey so that you can cut the top of his head off, then they will be forced to begin to look at other ways. I would rather do this in a more orderly fashion where we could simply say to our government, which funds so much of this, you know it's not working. Why are you still doing it? That would be better. But if that's not going to work, then we will certainly do what we can do in encouraging businesses not to play any part in it.
So, listeners, people should email or go to PETA.org and tell Air France to stop bringing monkeys to laboratories.
That's right. And they can see also on our website, if you look around a bit on our site, we do have video footage from inside a number of laboratories that experiment on monkeys. And they can see exactly what our concerns are. There's a monkey called Loretta. We documented her story at Primate Products Incorporated, a primate supplier in Florida who receives some of the monkeys that come in from overseas. And if you look at Loretta's story and what she went through, you'll understand exactly why this is such a problem.
All right. Now, on the day that we are taping this interview, there was some sad news about a man who is probably not known for his animal rights activism, probably known more for his civil rights activism. But he passed away on this day, or the news of his death was announced, and that was the former California Congressman Ron Dellums, who represented Oakland. And tell me about how people at PETA felt when they heard that former Congressman Dellums had died.
Well, Congressman Dellums was a hero to those of us at PETA, and especially those of us who've been at PETA for so many years, because he stood up for animals and he made his point of view known to others. There are a few quotes that I looked at after I heard that he had passed away, and I was reminded how strong he was, because he made a number of statements and took a number of actions to help animals in the early 1990s. So it was before people knew the word vegan, or before so much of what we now know as animal rights had been in our culture for very long. And one of the things that he said was, if it's radical to oppose racism and sexism and all other forms of oppression, then I'm proud to be called a radical. And I thought that was just wonderful at the time that he said it, because he just could see the connection between all forms of oppression. It wasn't about people versus animals. He understood that when it's oppression, it doesn't matter what the species is, or the gender, or the race of the victim. What matters is trying to stop it. And when he was on the House Armed Services Committee, he was listening to testimony about the use of animals in experimentation by the military. And I made note of what he said at that hearing. He said, I was just sitting here listening, and I was trying to take out the term animal rights movement and put in civil rights movement or peace movement. I was part of the peace movement, part of the civil rights movement. And you know what we heard? The majority of people don't support you. I would imagine that at one point, the majority of people would have said, we agree the world is flat, but that did not make it right. And after he made this statement, he directed the Government Accounting Office to conduct a review of every military experiment involving animals. So he was somebody who said what he thought, got that connection about all species and about oppression, and his passing is mourned by all of us.
Yeah, I know as a California native, as someone who covered Dellums, someone who has observed him throughout his political life, known as this firebrand activist, known for his big afro and his, being the voice of the voiceless, the voice of the people. For the people on the West Coast, he was important. He doesn't have the same kind of gravity as, say, Representative John Lewis, who was there marching with Martin Luther King. But on these other issues, he clearly saw the connection between civil rights and animal rights and speciesist sort of thinking. He really saw the world from the view of all minorities.
I think that was the wonderful thing about him. You know, he was fearless, too. I mean, he fought injustice wherever he saw it, from apartheid to the Vietnam War. He called for a halt to animal experimentation in the military. He exposed racism in the military. He was a person who really put it on the line to help anybody who needed that help.
And yet it's funny how to this day, you don't really hear much about Dellums, and you will even hear people think just the opposite of what he felt, that, oh, well, we're not animals. You'll hear people twist the logic around saying, oh, well, I'm a human being. I'm not an animal. I deserve more, or that kind of thing. But he saw that the oppressed were oppressed, no matter what species, and he was fair across the board and had compassion for all. That's the memory I'll have of Dellums.
Right, me too. And I think, if the only good thing to come out of his death is that people are reminded of these wonderful things that he said and did, and how important they still are today, that's a good thing.
PETA Senior Vice President Kathy Guillermo on the passing of California Congressman Ron Dellums, a man who saw civil rights and animal rights and the right of the oppressed is all linked. And she also talked about the stopping of AirbridgeCargo from shipping monkeys and how that plays a significant role toward ending the abuse of animals in lab research. For more on that, go to PETA.org. And that's our show this time. You can contact us at PETA.org. Find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or on amok.com, AMOK.com. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on Apple Podcasts, where you can rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. And don't forget, you can help the animals in PETA, especially if you have Amazon's Alexa. Just say, Alexa, donate to PETA. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.